Hello, and welcome to the Cash News Podcast. Informative conversations about all things currency and cash. We'll share insights on the issues affecting the world of cash today, like cash security, payments technology, and the cash supply chain. Your hosts, Meehan and Shaun Ferrari, hope to inform industry professionals and support better cash security and management by sharing the latest information on trends, strategies, and technology. This is the Cash News Podcast. Now, here's Tom and Shaun.
All right, we're back. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cash News Podcast. I'm joined by the famous Shaun Ferrari. Shaun, it's been a while.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, it has been a while. Sorry about that. Happy summer to everybody. It's hotter than hotter than whatever at the end of that sentence, but it is very hot, and hope everybody's summer is going very, very well. Going well for me. How about you, Tom? Everything
going great. It is warm. I think tomorrow will be 97 degrees in New Jersey, and it's beautiful with that 95% humidity. So it feels amazing. If you're in New York City, it's called the urban heat effect, which I read about the other day, which makes it feel like much hotter. It's disgusting, and then you get that nice garbage smell.
Oh yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
So
Yeah, well, transitioning from garbage smell to payments.
Payments. Well, so today's July 15th, and we were just chatting, as we always do before we get started, and today, officially, Target is no longer accepting personal checks.
I know, which is kind of big news, right? I mean, a big national retailer. I don't know, it probably says in the articles around it what kind of percentage of folks were using checks. We know it's, just as a whole, a very small percentage of folks, but checks are still, out there and being used, not at Target anymore though. So, curious to see. I mean, I think, what's interesting on the payment front, right, is that there's always new payments that come in, and very rarely, if ever, do payment types disappear. And what we've seen is, they might go away at kind of spots here or there, but as an overall system, they continue. So I'm going to be curious to kind of see. I get Target's rationale for doing it. Obviously, it's a lot of work to handle. It's a cost. There's not that much volume. Check fraud is really high right now. There's a whole host of reasons why they would want to do that. But what we have seen in some cases where, and this is not exactly the same, but when Starbucks years ago stopped accepting cash at some locations, that lasted for, I don't know, a week or two before that reversed, just because they don't like to upset customers, right? And so I'd be curious. Now this is, again, it's check, it's not cash, it's different, but let's see how it plays out. Is it going to be something that is a trend and other retailers decide to follow that trend and it's a kind of a push, or does Target see a loss of a certain segment of customers that causes them to rethink? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, so it's funny. I didn't read all of the articles, full disclosure, but I did read a few, and it was very much very low usage. So I'm sure somewhere somebody looked at it, right? Like I would believe that you would think that was part of the process. But to your point, I've seen a lot of different initiatives that retailers take, and then the fallout is, what is a very small percentage could turn into a very loud group of individuals. It's funny. I go back and forth, and people are like, "Oh, you still write checks?" I do occasionally write checks. I'm not a check writer, but I do use it for a couple of different things. I don't find myself ordering. I probably couldn't tell you the last time I ordered checks. They last a really long time, but I don't ever, like, literally, I can't remember the last time I used a check in a retail establishment. I'm not sure why. I'm sure why I would. Like, that's the funny thing. So it feels like this makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I've never used a check, I think, in my entire life in a retail establishment. I do remember my mom and my grandmother using checks at the grocery store a lot. I don't think my mom still does that. But I can ask her next time I see her. but I think I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned it though, right? It's just these decisions often come down to a more emotional resolution at some point, right? I mean, the data shows one thing. I am sure the data shows it doesn't make any sense to accept check. I have no doubt about that. But it is just that small
Yep.
but loud, potentially, group of people that use it, and they just have to know the right board member or the right person, or the right press,
Yeah.
and that can change. You never know. So it's interesting to see how it plays out.
I'm sure. I'm also curious, and the article didn't say this, is if they have a stopgap. So if you had an elderly person come in, do they have a way to do it at just, like with the exceptions? I've always, I'm always impressed and I'm not saying it because I was a retailer, but like retail has a way of figuring out like, okay, we're going to probably come up with it. This is probably going to be an issue. What happens, if we do get a customer in here, do we just tell them to go kick rocks, or do we have a plan for them? And oftentimes there is a plan. So
Yeah, I'm sure. Like for cash, for instance, there's usually a machine somewhere that gives
yep,
you a prepaid card. So go put your cash in there. Here's your prepaid card. It could be a very similar thing. Go to customer service.
yep.
Customer service will take your check. We're not saying this is what it is. I'm not saying that's what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I don't know what it is.
it
And
could be
the
a
articles
workaround.
lead me to believe that it isn't, but I would argue that a lot of times those articles don't necessarily do a good job of demonstrating the real scenario. I mean, I'm not knocking that as you can only write so much, right? Like you can't cover the gamut of every possible potential thing. So there is a chance that to Sean and I aren't going to know that. But I do think it's an interesting thing because it was about a month ago that the New York Times wrote an article and the heading was "We can't stop writing checks, and either thieves love it." That's what it was. I love this.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned prior, like check fraud's still a real thing,
For sure.
and I mean, it's not hard for me to believe that, but at the same time, I'm like, man, at what point does check fraud not become a real thing, right? Like, at what point do we get to the level of that's not the case anymore?
Yeah, no, and I think there's electronics that can help with that for sure, right? I mean, the faster you can, for folks that, I mean, there's several ways obviously that check fraud can be done, but a lot of what it is there's a delay, right? By the time your check is presented and it's cleared at the other bank, right? So the faster you can speed that process up, the more instantaneous, which some things like real-time settlement, RTP or FedNow or things like that can help in this regard. The faster that gets cleared, the less fraud, because some of it is double presentation fraud, right? It's like I give a check to Tom gives me the cash, then I go give the same check to somebody else, they give me and you just kind of go back and forth with that. Now that's one example. Obviously you can get account numbers and all sorts of stuff off of checks that you can make actual fake checks and draw them on people's accounts. So there's all sorts of fraud.
It's amazing that in 2024, like you talked about real-time payments, and so this is the argument, right? Like the argument is real-time payments, the fraud happens instantly. I mean, there's an argument to say it each way, but to me, it feels like, and again, as someone that is, with a risk background, it feels like today you would have a very small percentage of people using checks for payment, and this wouldn't be a real conversation. But interesting, it's definitely interesting. I will tell you that I have come up with many, many places that I've not been able to use cash. And it's interesting that some of them don't have that option. Some of them is just, and I think without the risk of, this is certainly not factual, it's just my opinion, is I think sometimes it could be just the person at the establishment that works there, the frontline worker going like, I don't want to count the money, so if I just turn that off, and it becomes interesting. It only matters when you need it, right? Like that was my comment, was like the only time you really feel it is when you're like, well, wait, I have cash today, like I need to pay. 90% of the time you're like, I never have cash, but the time you go to buy it, it's there, a challenge. The other thing that I've seen, and I know we spoke about this before, is man, I don't know. And at least where I live, there's not a restaurant that I go to that doesn't say if you pay with a credit card, we're charging you more.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more and more. Um, yeah, more and more the way it is. Yeah, we're gonna add 3% onto your bill because you're gonna use a credit card.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and I don't know where the breaking point is on that. I mean, even when I see that in a lot of cases, we talked about this too in the case of gas stations, right? They do. I mean, they do it all the time.
yeah, and
But
they have
I
for a
still
long
use.
time.
Oh, a long time. Yeah, yeah. But I still use a credit card. I mean,
It's
I
funny
don't
you
know
say
why
that because I didn't really
exactly.
think about it. It's been like that forever at gas stations, and I guess the behavior is like it's gas stations deal with it because I never even question it at a gas station. I'm like, yeah, you gotta do that. Um,
I know, but it's literally like 10 cents a gallon cheaper if you don't, right? If you use
yeah,
cash. And it's like, but then I think it's the inconvenience, right? It's like, okay, well, now I got to go to an ATM. I got to get the cash out. I've got to walk inside. I got to pay. I got to get change. It's like this
yeah.
thing.
It's funny though because what you just said though is this is the double edges. We pay for convenience, but a lot of things we do, like a
Yeah,
lot
for
of
sure.
it is convenience based anyway. So yeah, I definitely think so. For the check side of it, to date, I genuinely think they're the only what I would say top 10 retailer that I've seen that doesn't take checks or let's say top 25 because um, I know that Walmart, Macy's, Kohl's are all still taking checks. So that's an interesting kind of thing. Um, I,
Yeah.
you know,
But then when you look at others, others that don't, I mean, I think you can understand the more tech savvy ones. Like if you're talking about Amazon Fresh or a Whole Foods, I mean, they want you to pay with like your
and
palm
yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah,
your, I
yeah.
mean, they're moving full electronic, right? Like,
Yeah, and
you,
Whole Foods no longer Whole Foods is someone that doesn't take checks, and that's in grocery. Aldi, which is another interesting one that doesn't take checks. But again, I'm not sure. I this is the
Aldi surprises me a little bit, just in
yeah,
the
right.
sense of their clientele.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
think checks would be the
Same thing.
popular.
So, but Whole Foods is a grocer. So, like when I hear grocery, that's when I remember the grandma writing the check at the grocery store, right? Like to me. But then again, to your point, if you're Whole Foods, how do you have the contrast of come use your palm or write a check? Like there is a level of that piece of
Right.
it. Um, uh, all these also interesting because they're German owned, right? And
Mhm. Cash is
like
big in Germany though,
yeah,
but
cash
yeah,
is huge in
but check
Germany.
is
So
not. You're right. Check
so,
is not.
so
Cash
like
is. Yeah.
so that could be
Yeah.
the heritage there too. Although again very anecdotal, like I'm with you here. I feel like grocery place people would still use it, but I don't. I will tell you now that I'm thinking I was at my local grocery store and I did see someone writing a check in front of me not so long ago who was definitely in the older age bracket. So it could be a demographic thing, but
Could be.
I wouldn't, not no negative piece to Aldi or Whole Foods. I wouldn't put them at the size and scope of a
Sure.
Target.
Of
Like
course. Yeah. 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 It's a
it's just a
different.
much larger organization with a much larger footprint. And so I think that's what makes me kind of go, wow, that's like it's not that it's good or bad, it's just a type of
Yeah.
piece. So that's definitely an interesting one. So I know you've been doing a lot more trade shows around digital payments. What are you hearing?
Yeah. I was gonna say. I mean, I think one of the big takeaways from our last set of payments events, our Global Payments Summit and our Central Bank Payments Conference, which was in Kuala Lumpur a month or so ago now. Um, I'd say the one of the big themes that came out of that when it comes to digital payments is what we were just talking about in terms of fraud. There's a big desire out there from the clearinghouses, from the financial institutions, the central banks, all trying to leverage things like AI and other technologies to stop or prevent fraud on their networks. And a lot of discussions on the regulatory side and policy side about who's responsible for the fraud, right? Is it the bank? Is it the fintech? Is it the payer, the receiver? Like who is responsible for it, and how do you identify it and stop it? Particularly now, as we mentioned it in this discussion too, as we move to real time payments, you have to have a way to identify that fraud in real time, or slow down the payment, um, and slowing down the payment, again, isn't necessarily the end of the world if we're talking about slowing it down by 5 seconds. I don't think anybody really cares if it takes 1 second or 10 seconds to get from point A to point B when we're talking an improvement from like 3 to 7 days. So, there's ways you can slow it down and not have it be instant, but it still feel pretty darn instant. To the users of the system, right? But it's how do you input these like AI-based systems, things that, again, that card networks and that sort of stuff have done for years, and they're getting more sophisticated all the time, but that the folks that are running real-time systems now haven't really had as much experience with, right? They haven't been playing that transaction fraud monitoring service, that they're kind of being forced to get into that market now. So it's interesting. It was a big discussion on what is the new technology out there? How do you put it in? How does it identify it on a market infrastructure level that can help the banks as they implement real-time systems? So there was a lot of fraud discussion, which is, again, similar to the discussions we were just having on checks. I mean, fraud is the age-old trade, right? I mean, if there's a way to cheat a system, someone will find it and try to exploit it. So
Yeah, I think my take on that always is, and as someone that has made his living, right? Like, so it's important to say that around fraud and risk, um, you can't, you cannot allow that to stop or stifle the right things from occurring. You just have to really look at it differently. And I would argue with real-time payments that yes, the fraud could occur faster, but real-time payments isn't necessarily new either, right? Like we talk about this all the time. So like, it's just we're evolving. I think that we're in this kind of quasi balancing act always of risk versus not. But like if you looked at check fraud and you looked at credit card fraud, adding real-time payments, I'm not sure that I subscribe to the argument of that there's more risk. It's different risk. And interestingly enough, like that you and I talk about this all the time. It depends on where you sit, right? Like if you're, some people are like, oh, this is way, way safer. But usually they either have a different understanding of it or there's a vested interest in saying that. It's just like, I go back to the traditional, very simplified approach of, with some of these middlemen payment, like the Zells of the world, like people don't even understand that they're not even a payment company. They're just connecting two together. And the risk is not their service. The risk is someone in the middle, or Cash App, where, I don't know, you and I talked about the podcast, like some ridiculous amount of number of perpetrating fraud. That doesn't mean that the app is bad. It just, it's part of the, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's interesting, because again, if you look at what's historically happening with card networks, they've shouldered that burden, right? And that's where these 3% fees and all that sort of stuff that we talked about, cover the cost of that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you Tom didn't make that purchase, fine, I'll give you your money back and deal with it. Good luck with that with a check.
Yeah.
or with real-time payments for that matter. And that's the thing. It's like, how do you put that?
Well, I mean, I guess the argument could be said of it's the same as cash, right? If someone,
sure.
you can't, it's the crypto argument that I've always made of like, people are like, it's much safer. And I'm like, no, when, arguably what you're paying for with a credit card, right, is that protection. So yes, credit cards companies make lots and lots of money, as they should, by the way, like the infrastructure to build it. So I think
and you're
there
right.
are a lot of things here.
And you can design the systems, and that's what I think people are starting to talk about too, is where are those, and they're in place already, those limits, right? Because with cash, for instance, unless you keep all your cash in your house, some people do, sure. But assuming you're using a bank and an ATM and a normal
assuming
channel,
you're like 90% of the population.
Yeah, assuming you're getting it out of a bank in some way, shape, or form, there's a breaker there, right? That's going to stop that at some point for the day. Whether it's $300 at the ATM or $10,000 at a time at a bank branch, there's something that's going to hit it and say, hey, are you sure you want to do that?
Absolutely.
So there is at least something. It's not asking you every transaction you make and having that protection like a credit card, but there's a quantity amount. And I think that's what was scary with the real-time stuff until you think about the limits that they've put in place, right? Is that, well, now I'm essentially electronically connecting into something that's going to clear instantaneously. Where do we set that breaker so that it says, hold on? With Zelle, there's like a limit per day and that sort of stuff. Like,
Yeah, there's kind of stuff everywhere, right?
yeah. And there has to be, because, I think we know now as financial institutions and others, there is a burden of responsibility that can't just be thrown onto the customer, right? It is something for you to, rightly or wrongly, there's an education and responsibility layer now that's like needed to be there of, are you sure, is this legitimate? Do you really want to spend $10,000 at this hotel right now? Yes, I do. Or no, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's this kind of double-edged piece of the whole conversation of risk versus reward. And I also think that, it's funny. I'll go back to, gosh, I think it was Mexico City. I don't know where it was. We did a design thinking workshop on CDBCs with currency research, and one of the takeaways was, hey, why wouldn't everybody get together and come up with some sort of insurance or safeguard that like the FDIC, to make sure if we're going to do CDBCs and there's a fraud risk, that there's a pool that's paid into to protect against extreme fraud. And you know what? I'm not saying it because I did the workshop. It's actually kind of what we're talking about is we're still early enough where we don't necessarily know, like, all right, what happens? Is it a write-off? Who takes the write-off? Does the person who initiate it? Does the person who take, like, all of those things? But that's all, I would argue that's no different than any other thing that we talk about. It's just, it's new. And there's just a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece that I come back to at a lot of our discussions we have at our events too, is all the points that there's sticking points on now, not all maybe, but like 90% of them are policy regulatory questions. It's not the technological piece. Technologically, we can have a CBDC, we can have a stable coin, we can have a real-time payment network, we can have fraud detection, we can have cross-border payments. Technologically, it's not a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge, but it's surmountable, and we're in most cases there. It's just, what's the policy behind it? What's the regulatory structure behind it? What are all these limits? All this stuff that we're talking about is what slows it down and makes it not all that likely in a lot of these cases to develop some of this stuff in the near future, at least ones that require a lot of cooperation. The domestic schemes, like a real-time network within a country, even within the US, can be done by and large because it is not one regulator, but a small number of regulators that are usually working together fairly well, give or take. Depending on the topic, but
Maybe.
usually we can get aligned. Yeah, usually we can get aligned and get a system rolled out. But as soon as you then introduce, okay, now I'm going international. Now I've got different regulators with different policies and different governments and different ideologies, and I don't want to say you lose hope, but it gets complicated very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that so just to because I love the breaking news. You heard, everybody who listens heard Shaun say that it's technically not that difficult. So I think which I would actually agree with. I think we tend to overcomplicate we tend to overcomplicate the technology with the utility and the process. So I hear those conversations, and again, I don't know where we were. Everything's a blur now. I think we were at one of the currency research, and someone got up and did a marvelous job of explaining something, but talked about the technical side. And I'm going like, great, why did, there was no need to get into that level of technology detail with with the group, because now they're going like, this is why I don't like it. When the reality is that you and I, nor most of the people that are actually sitting at currency research, are the ones doing the math, are the ones doing the encryption. That is standardized. I think that's the thing people don't realize. Encryption standardized, tokenization in most cases are. it's the utility and the process where we all have to come together. And I would say that you're probably right. I think the bulk of the people are aligned. It's being aligned emotionally and being able to write policy and regulation around it is tough. I feel like there's also this thing that we in the payment space don't talk about enough, which is there's just it's not misinformation, it's fear mongering. It's this constitutive group that's like, oh, big brother, like when it's like, no, this isn't new. It's what we need to do. And I often say it all the time, like the cryptocurrency has been proven, even though we said this on the Cash News before everybody else did, that if you're willing to watch it, the FBI has done it twice now. They've been able to seize it. It eventually turns to money. So the chain eventually goes somewhere, unless you go to a Bitcoin ATM 75 million times, because you can't take out millions of dollars from an ATM, and that's not a fictitious. That's actual factual. Like if you had $100 million in cryptocurrency, you're never getting that out of an ATM. So when the Colonial Pipeline happened, when the JBF happened, the reason they were able to capture that money is because someone tried to move, $35 million and it followed the money. And they're like, oh, here you go. We're going to seize that. So nothing except cash is truly anonymous anyway. So I'm not sure why we can consistently go that. I love that there are these folks on TikTok and YouTube saying Big Brother, and they're using their Visa or MasterCard and American Express card, which literally, if you read the terms and services, they're telling you they're going to they're actually telling you we're going to take what you buy and sell it for marketing, not your name, but like Shaun Ferrari, demographic. So it's a little bit of fear mongering. It's a little bit of political polarization. So I know we're running low on time. So what do you have coming up in the future?
So coming up on that digital currency front that you just led into nicely, we've got our digital currency conference and our central bank AI conference, both occurring the week of September 23rd in London, where we will delve into all these things on stablecoins, the deposit tokens, digital assets, the use of AI for fraud prevention, for data analysis, for generative AI to help with policy making and report writing, all that sort of stuff that central banks do, supervision and regulation, all of that, ethical AI, responsible AI. So we're covering all that in a week in London, the week of September 23rd. So we're super excited about that. Great program together with over 50 confirmed speakers right now. Should be amazing. And then after that, in November, we have some regional cash and payments events. One in the Americas in New Orleans during election week, so that'll be fun. And then one the last week in November, Thanksgiving week here in the U.S. In Cape Town, South Africa, for that market. And that kind of rounds out the year in terms of events before we crank it up again in 2025.
It's awesome. Yeah, I'm repetitive on this one, though. I really wanted to go to the one in London, and I have a conflict. But if there's a way I can get out of it, I will be there. I'm actually speaking about. I'm doing a keynote in 2 weeks, or no, I'm sorry, 3 weeks on AI and risk, or actual versus perceived risk, in not so much the payment landscape, but in the overall. So it's been a topic that I've been actually diving quite a bit into. Again, similar to like what we're talking about real-time payments, a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion. And, I got asked a question on Friday that, was not a perplexing question. It's a question we don't know the answer to. Is like, do I think the AI bubble is going to burst? And I said, it might. and they're like, what? Well, there's so much news around it. Is this the .com bubble? Like, will it burst? And I said, even if it bursts, you're not going to undo the momentum. Could the financial side of it change? I'm sure it'll eventually catch up with. But what I see in AI in general, and this applies to payments, is that the advancements are happening much faster than in things I've seen in the past. I also would say this is a good and a bad thing, is while there's a lack of regulation, I see more attention from big businesses and government than in anything I've seen in my whole life, where there are people actually being involved and taking the steps. So I certainly think it's a huge play. And when you talk about real-time payments and you talk about fraud mitigation, we're just starting to crack the surface of what is potential, both good and bad. So both good and bad. And one of the things that keeps me up at night when we talk about AI is that I don't think voice authentication, which is something that was really, really good before, will work in the future. I think that AI has figured that out. But I still am pretty bullish on that, before robots take over the world, we've got a long way to go. Like I think it will get much smarter. If you haven't already played with some of the new voice features, you'll get a real feel of just how smart it really is. I would say that I'm impressed with it. So if I don't get to miss that, hopefully you'll tape it. If I don't get to go, hopefully you'll tape it, because I'm really looking forward to it.
We'll get a nice AI summary written of it for you.
Yeah, there you go. And then I'll be in New Orleans in November, like always. And there's you never know. I might even be somewhere else with you. So we'll figure out a way to stay connected. I'm all over the place as well, but my big trade show travel starts in the fall. It really starts in September. So I've got a couple speaking engagements in August, but they're closed sessions. So not that they're secretive. I'll be at the Access Leaders Retail Summit, which is a closed event, doing a keynote on artificial intelligence and risk. And so that's exciting. And then a lot of travel throughout August. So looking forward to see folks out again. July has been a quiet month. It's nice and hot. And with that, it's good to see you, Shaun, and thank you all for listening.
Likewise, yeah, good to see you. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a good rest of. We'll probably talk before the end of the summer, but
yeah,
have a good couple of weeks as we get through this heat, and
yes.
We'll be back with you again soon. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cash News Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful. Don't forget to like and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and be sure to visit us at thecashnews.com to stay up to date with the latest on the world of cash. Thanks again for listening to the Cash News Podcast.